What's up YouTube, this is Dennis Panuta for tutorialsEU. In this video you are going to learn how to use view binding with recycler views, and both of them are very important. View binding is the way to go to access your XML layout IDs directly in your Kotlin code, and Google has decided that this is best practices, so we should definitely embrace it. And a more challenging aspect of view binding is when you have to use it with recycler views, so any kind of list views that you want to use in your applications. So I've created this video in order to exactly explain how that particular thing can be done, because I believe that this is quite challenging and also something that you will come across anyways when becoming an Android developer. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, then please hit that like button, it really helps us out, and also subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and also of course leave a comment if you have any ideas of what we should make a video on. Okay, so let's get started. Hey, and by the way, we also have an article that you can find on our blog that is going over everything that you will see in this video with the code and also the resources. So you can just download them from there. Definitely check them out, and maybe you just want to read through it instead of just watching the video, or just use it as additional material. So check out the link in the description to get to the blog post. All right, so we have this recycler view here, and I want to use this with view binding. And up to Android 10, Kotlin extensions would have been the solution here. So you wouldn't even use view binding. Before that, you would probably just use find view by ID and so forth. But nowadays, you can of course still use find view by ID in order to connect a view to their binding classes. But the latest approach, and the one that Google recommends, is view binding. And view binding in normal views is quite simple, but when it comes to view binding with recycler views, then it's a different story. And in this video, we are going to look at how we can enable view binding and use view binding with our recycler views. So let's get started. All right, so I'm going to start with an empty activity. And by the way, I'm using Android 12 here in the background, even though anything later than that shouldn't be a problem either way. So this one will be view binding RV. All right, everything else stays the same. You can of course change the Android version if you feel like it, but Android 5 should be fine. All right, so once in your project, of course you have your main activity and all of the good stuff, but what's going to be important is that you go over to your build.gradle and you add a dependency. And it's going to be this build.gradle app, and we need to make sure that we have the build features in here. So inside of here, you add build features like so, and then in curly brackets, you add that you want to activate view binding. So you just set view binding to true. All right, and once you're done with that, you can sync it. It's really important to sync, otherwise view binding will not be activated and all of the following steps won't work. So in order to create a recycler view and display a list, we will need the following setup. So we need a recycler view, an item layout, a view holder, and an adapter. And if you don't know what all of these things are, you should definitely check out my video on recycler views, because even though it's 1.5 years old, it's still exactly the same. So first of all, I'm going to go to my resources and I'm going to go over this really quickly. Right, so activity main XML, and we're going to use XML here and not Jetpack Compose, which we're going to create a video on later. But here, instead of using all of the stuff that you see here, I'm going to use that stuff here. So basically what we have is we add a recycler view in here instead of using a text view. So generally you need to use this recycler view keyword inside of Android X recycler view widget, and then it will create this recycler view. And unfortunately there's too much happening here. So this is basically going to be the appearance. You have item 1, 2, 3, and so forth. Now you can of course modify how each item has to look like, and therefore you create a new item layout. Okay, so let's really quickly do that. Therefore, I can just right click in here and create a new layout resource file. Let me call that RecyclerView underscore item. And then the root element here could stay RecyclerView, and we can also leave layout. It's going to be fine. So now let's go back to the code because it's a lot easier to edit, at least in my opinion. And then what we want to achieve is a simple to-do list, right? So like we have it in this app where we have, well, take a walk, then eat breakfast and so forth. So of course you could uncheck them or check them with an additional item at the right hand corner, but this video should really focus on just how to reuse view binding in a RecyclerView. Okay, so here I'm just going to first of all make sure that I'm using the constraint layout, and my constraint layout is going to look like this. These namespaces for now they are not used, but that's fine. So I'm going to add a little bit of padding. Then I want to have a text view inside of this constraint layout, as well as another text view. And then finally, I want to have a view in here. So you see here, it has the title, then it has the time, and then finally, we want to have a little view, which will create a background. So basically, if we look at it, this is what it's going to be. So we have for every single item, this appearance. So title, and then let me scroll even further. Title, time, and then this little line that we added. So this view here is the line which has this grayish background. You can see it here. You can of course change it by selecting a custom color. That's really cool. And in the newest Android Studio versions, you can just click on the color and change it. I love that. All right, so then we now have the individual item that we want to use for our activity main. So every single item here should look like this RecyclerView item that we have just set up. So now if you want to display this without having to test it straight away, you can go to your activity main XML and you can make a change to your RecyclerView here. And what you can do is you can just add a tools statement. So here, tools, and you can define the list item property. So here I'm just going to say in my layout folder, I have this file called RecyclerView item. And now it will use this XML file that we just created as the tools display. So it will just display it here, basically. It's not much more than that. It's not going to impact our code itself. That's something we will have to change. But for our development process, this will be a lot nicer to look at, I believe. Okay, so now you can see how each item is going to look like. And that happens by choosing this tools option here. We just say, okay, I want the list items to be my RecyclerView items. And now comes the more complex part, and that is going to be to create an adapter. Well, the adapter needs a model, so let's create a data class and name it task. So inside of my examples here, I'm going to create a new Kotlin class. I'm going to call this one task, like so. And this will not be a general class, but it will be a data class. Okay, so data class, which will be of type task. And here I use brackets, not the curly ones, but the rounded ones. And I want to have a title, which will be of type string, and I want to have timestamps. So here, timestamps, like so. And they're not going to be of type timestamp, but they're going to be of type string as well. All right, so then of course we can get rid of this import. Okay, so this is going to be the data class that I want to use. Now, of course, we will need a task list as well, which I'm just going to create an object of. I'm going to keep it super simple. So here, let's create a new Kotlin class file, and I'm going to select object here. I'm going to call this one task list. And this is really just our data source, so to speak. Okay, you need the data source, and you could get the data from your room database if you want to use that, or from your API or whatever, but we're going to keep it simple. I'll just create a list of a bunch of items. So here, a task list, and this list of items is going to use the task. And by the way, I'm seeing here that I misspelled timestamp, so it should be with a capital S so that it fits my object structure that I'm using. So here I'm creating a list of tasks, and each task has a title as well as a timestamp. So it's just a text in form of a string here, which is going to be a number. And eat dinner at 7 a.m. So if you were partying really hard and you didn't have dinner before, then maybe having breakfast is like having dinner. So we can of course change that to PM as well. All right, so now let's go over to our main adapter that we need to set up, which of course now we'll use our task as well as the task list as the data source. Okay, so right click here, create a new class, and I'm going to call this one main adapter. So you're learning something about Android app development in this video, and maybe you want to learn a lot more about it. Then you can check out one of my 2 courses. So if you are a beginner Android developer, then I would highly recommend to check out my Android Masterclass course. There you will learn to build Android apps from scratch and you become a real Android developer. Or maybe you want to become a better Android developer because you are one already and you want to become a real pro. Then I would recommend to check out the Jetpack Masterclass, because there you will learn how to use Jetpack, which is a suite of frameworks that will make sure that you are a senior app developer. All right, so I would really recommend to check out those courses if you want to step up your app development skills very quickly. You can find a link in the description below, which will send you to the course with a huge discount. All right, so thanks a lot for checking out those courses. This really helps us out and this enables us to create these videos. Either way, I wish you a nice journey to becoming a great app developer. And now let's get back to the video. Okay, so now in our main adapter, let's go ahead and make sure that this is going to be of type RecyclerView, because that's what our view is like, right? It's a RecyclerView. And then I need to make sure that this is going to be the adapter, and I'm going to use main adapter, the main view holder, like so. Okay, now the main view holder, I will need to create an inner class in order to be able to use it here. So let's create an inner class, main view holder here, which will have an item binding called RecyclerView item binding. And then it's going to be inheriting from RecyclerView.viewHolder, like so. And here we need to pass the item binding, and we can use the root value from it. So the constraint layout that we are using. Okay, so let me put that into a second line so that it will be a little more readable. So this is going to be the inner class, and inside of this inner class we need to do one thing, and that is to bind our item. So here we bind the item with the task. So we say the data for the item should be gotten from the task. So now that by itself is not going to be enough. We need to state what information of the task should be used for which element of our RecyclerView item. Okay, so here, if you look at it, this RecyclerView item has 2 properties that are relevant. One of them is the text view that says title TV, and then the other one is time TV, because this third one is just a view that doesn't have to be used at all. It's just this gray line, right? So how can we connect our main adapter to the RecyclerView's title? Well, we can simply do that by just saying here that we want to use the item binding that is passed to the main view holder, this one here, and we want to use its time, well, here it's the title TV text, so the text property of the title text view, to be connected to the task title. So not the timestamp, but the title. And now the same goes for the other item that we want to access. And here, the other item, the other text view, was this timestamp text view here, and this is not going to be title but time TV. So here the text should be task.timestamp, like so. So now we're done with the view binding, but that by itself is of course not enough, because we also need to implement the members that our main adapter needs. So let's implement them, select them all 3 with the shift key and click OK. And now you see we get the onCreate view holder, onBind view holder, and onItem count. Now let's implement those. The easiest one is always the item count in my opinion, because it's just a one-liner basically. And here we're just going to return the length of our, or the size of our task list. So here task list.size. Now where's the task list coming from? Well, let's check it out. The thing is we need to pass it at the main adapter level. So here at the very top, we are creating our main adapter, which inherits from the recycler view, but we didn't pass any details to it. So now let's pass the task list to it, which is basically a list of tasks, right? So it's going to be this task list here that we want to use in our main adapter. And now we're passing it over here and we are finding out what is the size, and then we're displaying the amount of items that we want to display there. Now, what should happen once we create our view holder? So once our recycler view is created, well, here we need to return a view holder because it says it returns a main view holder. So let's do that. Let's just return a main view holder like so. And let's pass the items. And in order to pass the items, we need to inflate the binding layout. So we will return the main view holder inflating the binding layout. This is how the item layout is inflated when using view binding. So this is the part that is a little different to old-fashioned approaches. So here we're not binding, but we're inflating it here. So now let's inflate it. And if you want to inflate it, you see you need to have a layout inflator, and you can add additional info about the parent and the attached parent. So here I'm just going to say I want to use the layout inflator from the context of the parent. So here from parent context. So this by itself, as you see, doesn't cause any issues. So the code seems to be all right. But if you want to be sure, you can also add the parent as well as the flag false for the attached to parent. So now what should happen once we bind the view holder? So on bind view holder, well, here I just want to make sure that the task is going to be displaying the task list's position item. So here task list and the item at the position of the individual item. Because if we look at our recycler view here, you can see we have the individual items, but every single item needs to know which data it should get, and it's going to get the data based on its position. So take a walk here gets the position 0, which is this take a walk. Then the next item in the list will be eat breakfast, so it will be this item and so forth, right? So this is position 0 in the list, this is position 1 in the list, position 2 and so forth. So that's basically how our main adapter gets the data. So now the task itself is not enough because, well, we're not using it, right? So now let's actually use it by using the holder and bind the item. So now we are binding our task to the holder, to the main view holder. And what this will allow us to do is basically to, well, bind data to the recycler view using view binding. So let's recap what we did here. So first, we created a variable for the adapters list in the main adapter constructor. Then we return the main view holder in the onCreate view holder and inflate a layout by passing in RecyclerView item binding inflate. So this whole part here, where we are passing this RecyclerView inflate stuff, okay, to the constructor. So we pass it to the main view holder constructor. Then we bind each of the items in the onBind view holder and we get the item count. That's always something we need to return so that the RecyclerView knows how many items it needs to display. So now we have a list of items, of task items, so to speak. And let's actually bind all of this stuff in our main activity because currently it's empty, right? So this, unfortunately, if we run this application, it's not going to be enough. It's not going to do anything because the main activity doesn't know about the recycler view and the main adapter that we have set up and all of this stuff. It will just be an empty screen, so to speak, an empty white space because, well, it's going to use our activity main, but it doesn't understand what the recycler view is that it should display. So let's fix that. You see here, okay, find or view binding RV, it doesn't find it. Okay, so the first thing we need to do here is we need to set up our binding. So let's set up activity main binding, which can be a nullable. So let's add the question mark and then I'm going to say null because I want this to be null at the beginning. And then I'm going to instantiate it inside of my onCreate. So here, let's use binding equals activity main binding bind. And here we don't bind it, but we inflate it. So you see the IDE always wants me to bind it, but I'm actually wanting to inflate it. And I'm going to use the layout inflator here in order to inflate it. So if you want to know more about any of the items, you're wondering about, just hold the control key and click on the item and you will find out more about it. So it's this public layout inflator, which gets the layout inflator and returns the get window with the layout inflator. So you can even go further to find out what this method is, and it's an abstract method. All right, so now that we have that bound, let's set the content view, which we did here using the R layout, but I'm going to use it differently. So let me get rid of this line. I'm going to now use my binding that I just set up. So content view, where I'm going to pass my binding, which is a nullable root. Okay, so because it's a nullable, well, we don't need semicolons here, but it's a nullable, so I'm going to add the optional question mark here. And now we need to set up the adapter because we need to bind the adapter. So here, let's create an adapter object of our main adapter, because otherwise, well, why would he have prepared it? So main adapter with the task list of items. So we're going to use the task list object here, which contains this task list, of list items. Okay, so that's the object name, and that is the name of the list of task objects. So let's use that in our main activity here. We assign it as the data for our main adapter, because if you look at the main adapter, it requires a task list, because that's what we set up in the constructor here. So we say we want to have a list of tasks, and beautifully enough, this is a list of tasks. Now that we have set up that, let's go ahead and combine everything. So I'm going to use my binding and I'm going to get its task RV. So what is this task RV? Well, it's this recycler view that we had set up in our activity main XML. Okay, so here, this is the ID task RV. So we are accessing it by using the binding keyword, which is, well, using activity main binding. We're inflating the layout. Now we're using the recycler view in order to assign an adapter to it. And this task RV can also be null. So let's make that clear here as well. And let's just use our adapter. All right, so now we have assigned the adapter. And now the only thing that's important and left to do is to make sure that we are destroying. So on destroy our binding object once the on destroy method is called. So we just set it to null. That's just common practice, and it's really important to do that, because otherwise, well, it's just not clean. It could break your application. So we are saying, okay, once the on destroy is called, let's deactivate all of the binding. So nullify this binding object. So how is this different to what we did before? Well, here in the set content view, that's really the main point. We use this binding here instead of directly passing the layout. So what we had before was the set content view, which would just go ahead and say r.layout. So inside of the layout folder, I want to use the file called activity main, right? So this is the default that we had, but we don't want that. Even though, of course, we want to use this main activity, but we want to use it using data binding, which is why we don't use this line here, but we use this one here. And for this to work, we need to make sure that our binding is set up and inflated. And therefore, we need to use this activity main binding and inflate it with our layout inflator. And we get the root, which is this constraint layout. Okay, so we just say, okay, use this constraint layout and use it in our content view. So set it up with the entire activity main page, but using its root. And the root, of course, contains all of the details. But then we're setting the main adapter, which is this one here. And now we just need to make sure that we assign the right layout manager to our adapter. So we could either do it in Kotlin code directly, or we can go over to our activity main XML. And here we can assign a layout manager. And the one that I want to use is going to be a linear layout manager, which is just going to display the items on top of each other. Okay, so now let's run the application and see if this is going to display the details. And you see here, there they are. So now let's add another timestamp here, go to bed, and then here maybe I should add a comma. And this one will be midnight snack, which is not a good idea, by the way. I'm not sure how this works, probably 0 a.m. Like, I don't know how the American system works here, but now let's run it again. Let's not ask it again. And we can see here we have our midnight snack at 0 a.m. All right. So that's basically how you can bind using a recycler view with an adapter and combining everything. You can use your task RV here and use the layout manager like so, and assign the linear layout. So here, L linear layout manager, like so. And you need to pass a couple of parameters to it. So first of all, the context, and then the direction you want to use. So I will just use vertical in here, and I'm going to use false as the reverse layout, okay? Not reversing it. So then in that case, you could get rid of this line here and not assign the layout manager inside of the XML file, but instead inside of your Kotlin code. So let's rerun the application and see if our code is still going to work. And we can see it still works flawlessly. So this would have been the alternative way of doing it. So this is in code and this is in the UI item. All right, and that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please hit that like button and the subscribe button, and also check out our Android masterclass. We are updating it to Android 12 now, so definitely check it out. And also don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. You can find the link in the description below.